The number of coronavirus cases has now passed the 3 million mark in the United States. This according to Johns Hopkins University. But the White House is determined to pursue the reopening of businesses and schools. More on that at the top of the bulletin. Meanwhile, the city of Melbourne adjusts to life under lockdown. We'll bring you more on the latest from Australia's second biggest city as it faces into another 6 weeks of major restrictions to battle COVID-19 resurgence. And in Ivory Coast, all eyes are now on the October presidential election after the sudden death of Prime Minister Amadou Gon Coulibaly. He had been due to run instead of the incumbent Alassane Ouattara, who may now run for the third term to fill that void. We'll get more from France 24's Léane de Bassonville in Abidjan. Thanks for watching France 24. I'm James Creedon. We start this bulletin with some new global figures on the COVID-19 pandemic. Reuters news agency has tallied over 12 million reported cases across the globe with in excess of 548,000 fatalities. This is the accumulated sad set of figures over the past 6 months, according to Reuters. And the worst affected country remains the United States, where the situation continues to worsen. Earlier this week, more than 60,000 new COVID-19 infections were reported across the country. The spike, which was the largest single-day increase in any country since the start of the pandemic, brought the total number of cases past 3 million. Now, in response, several states are imposing new strict measures, including mandatory face mask orders. But the US president has not budged. Donald Trump has encouraged Americans to return to their daily activities and even threatened to retaliate against schools that refuse to reopen on time. Erin Ogunke has more.
Another day, another grim milestone set in the United States. For the fifth time in 9 days, the U.S. hit yet another daily record of new coronavirus cases, with at least 5 states in the South and West setting single-day records for new infections. The worrying spikes have done little to sway the Trump administration, however. After framing lockdown measures as harmful for the economy and confusing messaging around masks, the White House has made reopening schools its new battle, even threatening to take federal aid away from schools that refuse to reopen on schedule.
It's not just about kids learning and not falling behind academically. It's about all the vital services that children receive at our schools. It's about working families. It's about opening up America again.
After the administration criticized the Centers for Disease Control's guidelines for reopening schools, the organization announced it would issue new recommendations next week, though its director added the measures should not be used to justify keeping schools closed. Meanwhile, with stocks of medical supplies and protective equipment depleting rapidly in hospitals across the nation, officials in several states are pleading for federal assistance.
Expanded testing and direct assistance for cities like ours that are stepping up and paying out of our pocket for these tests, funding more local community health workers, real small business assistance, expanded benefits including unemployment, another cash payment for folks who are struggling, and aid for state and local government.
Even as 36 states have shown an increase in coronavirus cases over the past 2 weeks, the president has refused to use federal powers to address the pandemic, largely leaving local officials to fend for themselves.
And Donald Trump's tax returns are back in the spotlight with an impending decision by the US Supreme Court on whether Congress and prosecutors can examine those documents and other financial records. Mr. Trump has consistently refused to share his tax returns, saying as president he enjoys total immunity while in office. The ruling will answer that claim. Now, more on that as it comes into us in the next hour or so. Wednesday saw the first meeting between Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and President Donald Trump. The leftist Mexican leader lavished praise on his US counterpart, with both men accentuating the positive in their remarks, overlooking differences on business, illegal drugs, the border and migration. Now, turning to the coronavirus situation in Mexico, President Obrador's home state of Tabasco has the dubious honour of being the country's worst affected state when it comes to hospital bed occupations. The number of cases across Mexico is still on the rise. Over 32,000 deaths have been registered as being due to COVID-19, but figures are not seen as accurate due to a lack of testing. Haxi Mears-Bulkin takes a closer look.
An anxious wait for news outside this Tabasco hospital. In terms of confirmed COVID-19 cases, Mexico is the world's 8th most affected country, And this is Mexico's worst affected state. Among the most common concerns, a lack of resources and manpower.
Cartas en el asunto sobre contratar más médicos o más camas, más personal. Muchos dicen que es mentira, pero uno está viendo que cómo pasan los muertos así tan rápido aquí.
Por estar cuidando a los pacientes se están enfermando igual. Y se supone que entran a las 3 y ya son casi las 4 y no hay médico.
The numbers aren't reassuring. On Tuesday, the Mexican Health Ministry announcing that only 22% of all hospital beds in Tabasco State are unoccupied.
Tabasco y Nayarit son entidades que se han mantenido por debajo de este nivel de seguridad que representa al menos tener un 30% siempre de disponibilidad de camas.
Tabasco State recently announced the creation of a field hospital with capacity to treat 50 patients suffering from COVID-19, a fraction, it seems, of what could soon be needed if the outbreak isn't contained. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has been widely criticized for what many see as his nonchalance regarding the pandemic, locking down too late and opening up too early, as well as his blatant disregard for his own government's advice on social distancing. And like fellow virus skeptic Donald Trump, he continues to shun mask wearing wherever possible.
Now, for residents in Melbourne, it's back to life under lockdown. Authorities are battling a COVID-19 resurgence in Australia's second largest city. Residents have to stay at home for another 6 weeks, and the border between Victoria State and New South Wales has been shut down as well. Catherine Viette has the details.
Checkpoints around the city as police enforce new strict lockdown measures. It's the second time Melbourne residents will have to stay at home after a surge of coronavirus infections was detected in the city. Victoria State's leader warned people not to be complacent about the virus.
If we don't all continue to work together and take this as seriously as we have to, then we simply won't bring stability to these numbers, let alone drive them down and get to the end of this 6-week period and begin and then recommence the process of opening up. So everything is on the line here, and we need to make sure that we're all playing our part.
For the next 6 weeks, people will only be allowed to leave their homes for essential reasons, such as going to work, grocery shopping, or exercise. Schools will go back to online classes, and restaurants can only offer takeout, but shops and hair salons will remain open. For business owners just getting back on their feet, it's a tough break.
We are pretty lucky that we don't have to do too many changes. So we've always been able to do takeaways, and now we'll just continue to do takeaways, but it'll be our sole trade. Whereas before we had customers come in, sit down, have a drink, but unfortunately we can't do that anymore.
Meanwhile, the local government has eased restrictions on the residents of 9 local housing towers held in total lockdown over the past several days. After testing the 3,000 inhabitants, officials now say they'll be able to leave their homes under the same conditions enforced throughout the city.
Now, Lebanon is in the grips of its worst financial crisis since the end of the civil war 30 years ago. Things were bad before the global pandemic, but the COVID-19 situation has made things significantly worse. Businesses across the country are being forced to close while the cost of living has skyrocketed, a situation that is having a profound effect on Lebanese society and forcing many to emigrate. This report by our colleagues at France 2 and France 24's Haxi Mears-Belkin.
Once known as the Paris of the Middle East, Beirut is now the capital of a country on the brink of economic collapse. In the working-class neighbourhood of Burj Hamoud, the effects of massive inflation are all too present. Some prices have become so volatile they're no longer displayed. Essentials including nappies and baby formula have more than doubled in price.
هيدا 14,500 وهيدا 29.
This note used to be worth €60. Now it's worth 10.
يعني كنت أعيش بال100,000 شي جمعة. بجيب حفاضات بنتي وحليبها وجيب أكلاتي وشرباتي ب100,000.
Today, half of all Lebanese citizens live below the poverty line. Political instability, corruption and more recently the coronavirus have wrought havoc on the Lebanese economy. Each day new businesses go bankrupt and scenes of despair aren't unusual. Here a man robs a pharmacy at gunpoint. He leaves with a packet of nappies. And last Friday, a suicide in public sent shockwaves through the country. The impact of the country's economic situation is even being felt in the Christian Ashrafie neighbourhood, the capital's wealthiest. Here, scores of older people have now come to rely on food handouts.
هيدي أصعب بكتير. يعني كنا عشنا حرب من قبل بس ما كان في هالغلا هيدي.
With the spectre of poverty and instability looming over the country, many Lebanese are pinning their hopes on the International Monetary Fund throwing the country a financial lifeline before it's too late.
Right, to Ivory Coast now, which is the country is coming to terms with the sudden death of Prime Minister Amadou Gon Coulibaly. He had recently returned to the country after being treated for heart issues in France and was the likely ruling party candidate in the upcoming presidential election. Now many in the RHDP party feel incumbent President Alassane Ouattara should stand for a third term. Léane de Bassompierre in Abidjan joins us now. Léane, President Ouattara was not expected to run again. He's been in power since 2010. What more can you tell us about how the country is grappling with Prime Minister Coulibaly's death and the prospect of another Ouattara term as president?
Well, we do know that the ruling RHDP will be meeting at 4:30 local time today. I think that will be the centre of discussions whether or not President Alassane Ouattara will seek a third term or choose somebody else within the party ranks to run as the party's presidential candidate on the 31st of October. We do know that former Prime Minister, or the late Prime Minister Amadou Gon Coulibaly, was his preferred successor. Others that have shown presidential ambitions before have been sidelined. And so it's going to be difficult and interesting, should I say, to see who now calls out of the woodworks. Defense Minister Hamid Bakayoko, who is standing in as Prime Minister while Amadou Gon Coulibaly was in France, he is a likely candidate, but I'm sure others will be waiting in the wings as well.
What can you tell us, Léane, about the mood in Abidjan? This was a very sudden death, despite health issues. What is the mood like? How are people responding to this and to the impact on the political scene?
Well, he arrived back in the country last Thursday, and less than a week later, the juxtaposition of the mood in the city is quite stark. People are very, there's really a feeling of sadness that is hanging over Abidjan today. People, despite social distancing restrictions, they huddled around their radios last night in local restaurants, distraught at the news of what had happened. Many have made their way to his primary residence in Abidjan, as well as the residence of his mother, to pay their respects to him, to the president, and to the family.
OK, thanks for that, Léane de Bassompierre in Abidjan. That brings us to the end of this edition. Thanks for watching.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa, for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith on France 24 and France24.com.
The world is ever-changing. The news doesn't wait. That's why at France 24, we'll always be there to help make sense of world events. For the best international coverage, 24 hours a day, no matter what. France 24, with you everywhere, all the time. Liberté, égalité, actualité.